Welcome to Ivory Tower Populism Videos. This is video 4, The Nature of Government Services, Part 1. Or, we the voters just want politicians to feel our pain, but we don't really expect improvement. According to video 3, only public goods, meaning non-rivalry of consumption and non-excludability, should be free to use. If a good is non-excludable, you can't charge a voluntary user fee for the service. If a good demonstrates non-rivalry of consumption, it isn't economically efficient to charge a voluntary user fee. But otherwise, we should only charge those who use those particular services. For the people of a society to be free, they should have voluntary user fees for any other service provision. If you force someone to pay for a service they didn't want and didn't ask for, you are taking away their power. Now, of course, some goods are best demanded collectively by a group or a club rather than an individual. That does not change the argument if you understand how club goods work, because the individual chooses to be a part of that club. See video 3. Those who do choose to pay for the service can demand higher quality, that is, demand that their interests be represented. That's resource dependence theory from video 1. But many of these free or subsidized government services, while promising to empower us in some way, are not actually intended to do that at all. They have some other beneficiaries in mind. Regarding all the free stuff on the internet, we've all heard the expression, if you didn't pay for the product, you are the product. Moreover, it seems that we the people, we vote for politicians, not because they deliver results, but merely because they bitch about the same things we bitch about. We, in the US, elected an economic nationalist, and our trade deficit actually increased. In a city where the disenfranchised, by any metric, only became more disenfranchised, we saw a politician just paint BLM on a street. That is all we ask of our leaders. Of course, our leaders likely then answer to someone else. Look at our track record. Our infrastructure was failing, so President Obama promised to fix that with a $1 trillion package. Then President Biden promised the same, doubling the package. Do our highways look any different to you now? The 1960s Great Society, the war on poverty, promised to lower poverty. The COVID bill promised to cut child poverty in half. The argument about a century ago was we need public schools for all to have an equal chance at the American dream. If they had delivered on that promise, why would we now demand free college in order to fulfill the exact same promise? If those promises had been met, why do we still always need perpetually more? Are we not spending enough? Or are we just not getting the results we were promised? When we subsidize daycare centers, nursing homes, colleges, etc., we have to ask ourselves, is that for the benefit of the users of those institutions or for the institutions themselves? So we all know about the military-industrial complex. The military-industrial complex refers to the informal alliance between the nation's military and defense industry suppliers, which together comprise the vested interest that influences public policy. It's about a bargain between policymakers and the suppliers of national defense, including defense contractors, private military contractors, the Pentagon, politicians, etc. It is about the politics of military spending in general and the lobbying to support the corresponding bureaucracy. If you don't support this defense contract, then that means you don't support the troops. In short, over time, decisions for defense spending become less related to the interests of national defense, protecting citizens, and more related to the interests of the bureaucracy. Policy is designed to benefit the producers, contractors, lobbyists, politicians, more than consumers, citizens, and taxpayers. But it is equally clear we also have an infrastructure industrial complex, an education industrial complex, and a welfare industrial complex. Think of the politics of welfare. If you don't support this spending package, then you clearly don't care about kids going to bed hungry. In other words, we have a supplier industrial complex, government suppliers. And government spending often is intended to benefit the suppliers, those who provide government services, rather than the direct beneficiaries and taxpayers. Ultimately, the purpose of every organization is its own survival. The same goes for institutions, which you could think of as a group of powerful, entrenched organizations over time. Maybe one purpose of having government enterprises in the first place is just so that the suppliers receive their funding regardless of whether they deliver the goods. In fact, they might get even more funding the worse the job that they do. The argument being the lack of funding was the problem. Whenever there is talk about educational reform, you always hear the refrain, "This will threaten public education." That statement is telling, as it doesn't express concern over students in public education, but rather public education itself, the institution, the status quo. In the field of public policy, and especially within education, there's been a real pushback against these market-like ideas of demanding outcomes. Accountability for results is too much like the free market, and that's a bad thing. Now, I want to be fair here. Many of the performance-based funding regimes actually have not delivered the results that we want, improve productivity. But the point should be to assess why and fix it. Design a funding regime that will work. As an aside, under the testing and performance-based funding of No Child Left Behind, there was a cheating scandal by some Atlanta teachers. Now, the only point I want to make here is that there were powerful defenders of those teachers, such as the legacy media showing its true colors in an article in the New Yorker, some even calling it civil disobedience, as if erasing wrong answers and replacing with right answers in the dark of night in the hope that no one ever finds out, but the school keeps its funding, could ever be considered civil disobedience. Every case of civil disobedience I've ever seen is brave people very publicly displaying their lack of cooperation with the entrenched powerful elites in the hope of persuading the rest of us of the justness of their cause. The legacy media and legacy education acting in cahoots were not pushing against entrenched powerful elites. They are the powerful elites. But in the midst of all of this corruption, there may be a way to mitigate some of the problem, to create a performance-based crowdfunding system in the spirit of the capital-owning democracy, a description of which is forthcoming in future videos. And these are the corresponding references for this video. And we'll see you next time.